So what we intend to do for the commercial sector is build a unified platform for satellite operation. Currently, most of the satellites that are getting launched will have to be operated, and there is huge operational cost associated with it. And a lot of these satellite companies or space companies who are launching satellites are not launching satellites because they want to do it. They're doing it because it will benefit their customers. What if a company like us will help them give a solution where they don't have to invest their time, infrastructure, and resources on building a satellite operation platform, but rather can use a system that we've built and automate space operation to a certain extent.
Hi, wherever you're joining us, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to Tech Conversations, where I bring you insights from tech entrepreneurs, CXOs, and investors. I'm Hari Arakli, and in this episode, Anirudh Sharma, co-founder and CEO of Digantara Research and Technologies, gives us a quick update on progress at his space situational awareness venture in Bengaluru. An immediate update, in fact, is that the aim is now for Digantara to become a more holistic platform, providing broader space domain awareness for both commercial and strategic purposes. In this conversation, Anirudh also talks about the challenges of building a deep tech company from India that can sell its products to global customers. All right. Thank you so much for making time for this.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming.
I know within the industry, folks already know your work and you have some international partnerships and some customers and so on. For a more general audience, maybe you could give us a 1 or 2 minute quick recap of what Digantara is all about today. The field of space situational awareness is what you call it.
Right.
Yeah. Explain that a bit and give us a quick overview of Digantara, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Digantara, we are a space situational awareness company. What that does mean is basically we build an infrastructure layer for the space economy. Just to keep it more simple, the first satellite was launched in 1957. Since then till now, we have over 11,000 active satellites in orbit. And going forward, it will only increase. So to support the growth of the space industry, you need a mechanism to navigate in orbit or understand what's happening. And that's something that we built at Digantara. What space situational awareness exactly means is just knowing everything around you, or it's more of being situationally aware of what's happening in the orbit. That's in a nutshell what we do at Digantara. So often I use this term called Google Maps. The reason I do this is just to make it much more simpler for the audience to connect. What we build is Google Maps, but for space. We collect data of what's happening in the orbit, and then we combine all the data into a library, build analytics. This is served to different customers in the space industry. For example, if you're a commercial satellite operator, it's more about satellite operations for you. How do you navigate your asset in the orbit? If you're an insurance company, you need to understand risks in the orbit even before you build an insurance product. So that's something that we do with the insurance products. For defense, it's more of a strategic angle where during every war, space plays an important role in navigating a lot of assets in the orbit in a way that it is strategically helpful for any nation. For that perspective, we provide intelligence and decision-making capabilities for a defense agency. And lastly, we have regulatory bodies. Currently, we don't have a lot of regulations around in the space sector. It's just because of the nature of it. Right now, a lot of countries are working towards building regulatory bodies and also regulations or guidelines to ensure everything in space happens in a sustainable and safer manner. For that, regulatory agencies would require understanding on what's happening in the orbit, how does it change if there is any dynamics around. So for that, you need again tracking data. So these are 4 sectors that we broadly cater to in the space industry.
Through your work, we understand that even a minute particle moving at a high speed, crashing into a satellite can pretty much destroy it and so on. Can you explain the significance of of your work?
So there are some orbits in the in space that are usable, So for a layman, space is something that's infinite. But for us, who is doing scientific expeditions or launching machines for benefit of humanity, it's pretty much finite, because I can't launch my satellite, let's say 60,000 kilometers away, and still expect it to benefit something on Earth. There are a lot of satellites that are put up right now at 400-kilometer orbit or 500-kilometer orbit, and these are internet satellites. So like I said, 70% of satellites today are commercial, and a lot of these commercial satellites are mostly into remote sensing, communications, internet connectivity. So for all these use cases, there are certain orbits that are usable, not all of them. And similarly, in the traditional space industry, we put a lot of satellites in geostationary belt, because the advantage that you get in geostationary orbit is that it is so far away that it moves at the relative velocity of the Earth's rotation, because of which you get benefit, and that satellite is always over India. Let's say if India launches the satellite to geostationary belt, that's always over India, and that's used for communications. So that's how orbits were divided. Now coming back to the point about space being finite, it is important that when growth happens, we need to ensure that growth happens in a sustainable manner. So like I said, again, the analogy of aviation sector, during the early days of aviation sector, you didn't have a lot of airplanes. People couldn't afford air travel. At that point in time, there was no necessity for air traffic management as a system or a service. Today, you have an international body guiding all the aircrafts in the orbit, or there is a treaty, International Civil Aviation Organization, that is basically a single body that helps standardize air traffic. We don't have something similar in space. The reason to that is large spacefaring nations today are geopolitically not aligned. Looking at the scenarios that we have today, it's very difficult to bring US, Russia, China on the same table. Hence, commercial companies like us will only contribute in ensuring we have sovereignty when we supply these data sets to defense. At the same time, for commercial operations to happen in a sustainable manner, we need something like what we're building. And space situational awareness and space domain awareness are two terms that are oftenly used in this industry. There is a thin line of difference between these two terms. The first term, space situational awareness, as the word itself says, space situational awareness means understanding awareness around you, situational awareness around you. But what does space domain awareness mean? So we would like to understand space as a domain, not just from local perspective, but everything that's happening in the orbit. That's more of a defense or a government term that came up in 2019.
Mm, mm. Okay. Can you talk a bit about important developments, milestones at Digantara in the last 12 months? I mean, we know that you've raised some funding, and you've told us you've built now this satellite assembly and testing center. Give us a quick update of the top developments at Digantara in recent times.
Sure. So we started this in 2020. We were based out of the Indian Institute of Science. So we initially focused on just the research part of it, because space is expensive. You can't do mistakes. So we wanted to spend all of our money, the funds that we had raised during seed round, on developing technologies. So initially we developed a space weather sensor or a space weather monitor that we launched with ISRO in the year 2021. And then again in the year 2022. Again in 2023, in January, we launched another sensor of ours on SpaceX. So right now we are focusing on building our next set of sensors that can aid towards space situational awareness. Now, what does it mean to launch a space weather sensor and a couple of more satellites? So like I said, space situational awareness means understanding every single thing happening in the orbit, including environment. So we started working towards understanding the environmental risks, because you recently saw, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, there was a huge surge in solar activity, and you could see northern lights everywhere. Almost everywhere in the US, everywhere in Europe. That's just because of the solar storms, which will definitely affect satellites and satellite activity, which is a huge risk. And you need to protect satellites from such risks. So that's why we launched our first space weather monitor to understand such extreme activities in the orbit. And then currently we're working on launching our next set of sensors. These are electro-optical sensors that can track objects up to 5 centimeter in the orbit and build our own independent library. So our last 12-month progress has been mainly focused towards building three fundamental blocks of our technology chain. The first one is sensors, where you need hardware. So what we're working on right now is building the hardware infrastructure. In our case, these are satellites or ground-based sensors. So we're working towards building our first ground-based telescopic observatory or optical observatory in Ladakh. So we have a land there which we will use towards building this particular observatory and inaugurate in next couple of months. So this will inherently give us advantage to track all the space activity over this part of the world, because we have lack of sensors in this part of the world, and this will substitute what's happening. The second part of our hardware chain is the satellites that we are building. These are satellites that will complement what the world already has. Again, taking Google Maps into reference, Google Maps today crowdsources data. It gets data from our phones to help you navigate on land and then help you understand how much traffic is there. That's just because Google is collecting data from our phones, users' phones. So we do a similar thing in space where we collect data from satellites and we crowdsource data from several other mechanisms like government agencies supplying data to us. So that's the second part of our building chain or technology chain, where we have data fusion and data processing capabilities, where we crowdsource data, process it, and build it into a library. Once we have the library, the last part of our technology chain is analytics. This is a software that we've developed where you'll be able to understand strategic movements of the satellite, or it has several different features. Like I said, it depends on which sector you're catering to. If you're catering to a commercial industry, our offering is different. If we are developing that for defense, our offering is different. For example, for defense, it's more about understanding where a satellite is at what point in time, how many satellites are moving over a given region of interest. For example, if you want to know over Ladakh, how many Chinese satellites are flying right now, our software will be able to do exactly that based on the data that we've collected. So these are three fundamental blocks of our business. Apart from that, like you initially said, we do have a lot of international corporations. So we have our company in Singapore today. So our first customers were Singapore Space Agency. So they started procuring data sets from us to train their machine learning algorithms. And we recently announced our second contract with the Australian Space Agency. So this is to build a sensor infrastructure for them so that they can launch it as part of My3 mission. So these are a couple of international engagements that we're up to right now.
The hardware sensors, are these off-the-shelf sensors that you can equip your CubeSats with? Last year you told us you are going to put up a constellation of what you call 6U and 12U CubeSats. And just for the benefit of our audience, the 6U, 12U refers roughly to the type of dimensions of the
dimensions,
satellites, right?
So it's more of when you stack six
units.
1 centimeter cubes or 6 units, that becomes a 6U, and similarly 12U.
So I was curious about whether these are sensors that you need to develop sort of from scratch, or you can get off-the-shelf sensors and then you can write your own software for it. How does that work?
Okay, so there are different complications to this. The first step is basically we using COTS components that are already available. So we tested most of our systems and system performance with what's already available, because that's cheaper and faster to go to the market than doing an R&D on the sensor level itself.
Right.
So we initially looked at multiple sensors that are available in the industry, but later, after certain months, we figured out that there is a performance drop in the commercial sensors, because these commercial sensors were never meant to do space domain awareness. These have several different use cases. We're just using the same sensors for different purpose. So that's something that we initially tested. So one of the first satellites that we're launching right now with the electro-optical systems carries commercial off-the-shelf sensors. But the entire optics above that was customized to our requirements. So we had to design and develop it. Like I said, it's mainly because of the performance. Going forward, since we've seen that there is a performance drop, while we launch our satellites, we've categorized our satellites into two categories, generation 1 and generation 2. For all the generation 1, we'll use COTS plus our own designed optics. But for the generation 2 set of satellites, we are building the chip internally. So we are ensuring that the chips that we're building will be useful for our own application and will have better performance than what's already available in the market.
What is COTS? I'm not familiar with this term.
It's commercial off the shelf.
Commercial off the shelf. Okay. It's generally sort of well known in the industry,
Space
is it?
industry.
Okay, commercial off the shelf. Okay. And on the software side, again, you've told us about building a platform called Space Map and another
Correct.
one for which is for defense use, a threat assessment and response suite. Where are you at on these? These are now commercially available, is it?
Yes. So stars, we have released the version 1 of stars, where it's available for defense user to subscribe and work on understanding or wanting to make a strategic decision on certain things in the space. They can use the software. This is something that's readily available with us, though we are making certain improvements over what we already have. Because right now we have around 4 features as part of stars. Going forward, we are integrating several more features where you not only get understanding of where an object is, but also the picture of the object that we track. For example, if you want to see a Chinese satellite from our systems, so the first thing that you'll see is just a streak, or you'll just know where the position of this object is. Going forward, if a user wants to understand how does the satellite look, what could be inside the satellite, that's something that we do with another software of ours called Iris, where we are currently working towards integrating imagery information and radio intelligence information into this particular software, so that it becomes not just space domain awareness software, but an holistic space domain awareness software, which includes everything from an imagery to radio intelligence.
I would imagine for strategic and defense purposes, your customers, I guess those would be governments, they would want to put the software or deploy it on their own computer networks. But on the commercial side, your Space Map platform, and I understand it as a platform in the works. So I wasn't very sure whether it was a product or a platform. So that, what is sort of the medium to long term plan over there? Will it be working like a SaaS model, or how do you deploy?
That's the plan. So what we intend to do for the commercial sector is build a unified platform for satellite operation. The reason I say this is because currently most of the satellites that are getting launched will have to be operated, and there is huge operational cost associated with it. And a lot of these satellite companies or space companies who are launching satellites are not launching satellites because they want to do it. They're doing it because it will benefit their customers. Let's say remote sensing. So remote sensing is a business where they click images of what's happening on Earth, and they're launching satellites because they'll have to get best images, and it's an operational cost for them. So it's more of a cost overhead. What if a company like us will help them give a solution where they don't have to invest their time, infrastructure, and resources on building satellite operation platform, but rather can use a system that we've built and automate space operation to a certain extent. So that's the plan. So what we're building here is a SaaS platform that they can subscribe on monthly basis per satellite, which they can use for their satellite operation. Here, the definition of satellite operation is different for different commercial customers. Let's say you're a commercial customer who already have satellites in space. So you would only require the service, let's say, for understanding what's happening around your satellite. When would it collide? If it is in a path of collision, do I have to maneuver, and fuel consumption associated with it. So you'll have to optimize fuel consumption for you to move from one point to another. And then about telemetry, communicating with the ground station, when will certain satellite pass over which ground station. To monitor all such activities, the software can be useful. But there is another set of customers who are wanting to launch satellites but haven't launched, for them, our service starts from the planning phase. Where can you launch your satellite? Which orbit do I think is beneficial for your application? Is it 500 kilometer? Is it 800 kilometer or 1000 kilometer? From planning that to once you're inside a rocket and you get your satellite launched, which means ejected out of a launch vehicle, understanding where your satellite is, that is called early launch operation phase. Once that is done, the satellite operation parts kicks in. So it's more of an entire life cycle software for a satellite mission, from planning to operation to end of life, because now you have to adhere to certain guidelines where you'll have to work towards deorbiting your software, deorbiting your satellite from space. So that's something that our software will help.
So now your plan is that the space domain awareness, as you described it, that is sort of at the highest level of insight that you want to provide to your customers. So is that going to be the main platform into which space
Yes.
map and stars and
Yes.
will feed into that?
Yes.
Okay.
So our entire goal is to work towards building this holistic space domain awareness platform. That's the first step to monopolize the data sets that we're generating today and then supply to the industry, be it rocket companies, satellite companies, defense. Insurance is something that is unheard of today for in-orbit satellite insurance. That's just because of the risks that are associated with satellite launches, and people are not aware about the risks. So providing risk reports for regulatory agencies to understand what incidents have occurred in space, how do you regulate it better, for all sorts of things. Space map and space domain awareness is one holistic tool that.
And when do you expect this to be commercially available? I'm thinking parts of it are already available.
Correct.
And
So this is more of an iterative process, because space industry is such industry where it takes product maturity takes much longer. So what we're doing here is we are building this in compartments. Initially, we're focusing on defense, releasing the defense bundle, then commercial, in commercial again, different versions. So the one that we will launch in next couple of months is called Flight Dynamics as a Service. This is something that we provide to our satellite operators, where we help them navigate their assets, plan their past predictions, plan their contacts with ground stations. So it's done more or less in bits and pieces. When would it be available fully? I would say in next 2 years, because we will require huge amount of investment that has to go into building the sensor network. So like I said, we are building one in Ladakh right now. Similarly, we have to launch multiple satellites, and these satellites would have to go to different orbits, and we have to get to a stage where we are independent of the data that we collect from the world. We are collecting all the data from our own sensors. So today, most of our softwares have several data inputs, and these data inputs comes from several government agencies or even open source data, which we are crunching down and building analytics. So the goal is to eliminate all of that and build an accuracy metric so that a user is confident to use our data.
So in terms of the constellation of satellites, I would imagine these would be low Earth orbit satellites, like you said, 400 kilometers, 500 kilometers. Is
So
that
our satellites will be launched in different orbits, starting from 500 kilometers to 2000 kilometers. But our initial plan, initial set of satellites, initial 8-10 satellites would go to orbits between 500 to 700 kilometer, because that's where you have huge object density. So it's better to track there, because it doesn't give us an incentive to launch a satellite today to 2000 kilometer where there are no commercial satellites or debris. So once the space activity increases, so this is more of a function of the space activity in terms of how many we launch and where we launch.
What's tentatively the timeline to launch these 8 sensors?
8 sensors in next 1.5 years. This year we have a launch planned for at least 2 of our missions. Early next year, another 2. So there are several missions stacked up that we will be launching on SpaceX and PSLV rockets.
What you said initially about one project with ISRO and one that you launched on SpaceX, those were like technology demonstrators?
Those were technology demonstrators for space weather. So these were sensors focused on understanding the proton activity in the orbit, because 85% of the radiations in space are high energy protons, which will have adverse impact on satellite activity. This can cause satellites to move from one orbit to another. It's called perturbations. So we wanted to understand the effect of proton activity in space. That's why we launched.
Mm. So, in terms of your sort of timetable towards becoming a full-fledged commercial operation, these 2 years that you'll take to launch all the satellites, is that kind of the timeline?
Yeah, so while we launch our satellites, we can always go out in the market like we have done already with Singapore and Australia, where we have our other associated data products that we have built, which is independent of the data that we are generating right now. Because at the end of the day, if we are able to give a solution to our users which has value in terms of the analytics that we're providing, that's something that we are already doing today. So our go-to market is something that's planned in a very structured way between the satellite launches and the software that we're developing. While we launch our satellites, which will definitely take some more time, we want to still go out in the market with the products that we're building on the software side.
Overall, how many customers are there who are using some kind of analytics or some service from you as of now?
Right now, we have 6 to 8 customers spread across the world who are working towards integrating our platform or our APIs to their mission operations suite. Like I said, most of our customer base today is mostly defense and government, and that's the nature of the space industry. Initially, most of your contracts will come from defense because they understand the sector the most, they understand the need of the solution the most, also because of what's happening in the world geopolitically.
And after the initial phase of 8 satellites, and you're going to launch some more, overall, what's the plan for how many satellites you need in your constellation?
So we are looking at launching 40 satellites. Like I said, this number is still the function of the space activity, and this is an estimate that we have. If the space industry and the satellites in the orbit continues to increase at the same pace as it is growing right now, we will launch around 40 satellites to cover the entire lower Earth orbit.
You've kind of finished a series A1
So
earlier this year.
we have just raised our series A1, and we've just closed the series A2. So the series A1 and A2 were led by Peak 15, Aditya Birla, and SIDBI. So we have multiple investors across the world. Even we have a Japanese investor who is helping us with the Japan markets.
Right.
So so far we've raised around $14.5 million.
In the context of how the kind of work that you are doing, I mean, certainly in the private sector, no one has done it in India before, at least I'm not aware of. Correct me if I'm wrong. Your growth sort of money is going to be substantial in terms of requirement. Do the investors understand, the potential, and even if they understand the potential, do they understand that you can actually do this being based in Bangalore and not in the US or Europe or wherever?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question because having seen the deep tech investment markets in India, you don't have a lot of success stories in deep tech yet. It's more of a growing industry in India, and we're yet to see results for the deep tech ecosystem in India. And this just picked up in like last 3-4 years. And a lot of investments have gone into be it space, semiconductor, EV, and few other deep tech markets. Having said that, investors right now are kind of interested in deep tech, and a lot of funds that initially weren't focused on deep tech are now focusing on deep tech. I think that's mainly because of the government's involvement and regulatory changes that's happening in India. So we saw government of India open up space industry for the private companies. So that was more of a positive signal or good signaling to investors to invest into this ecosystem, because now government is focusing on make in India. Same is happening with defense sector. So it's kind of very early, I would say, to understand whether the growth capital will come from India, and also looking at the fact that as a market for deep tech products, it's still very early in this part of the world. So we have to be a global company from day one. We cannot just be focused on one particular geography. Hence, we also have set up a US team that fully focuses on US government sales activity, just understanding what the US government needs, what the US defense needs, and then provide them with that solution. But there are still certain challenges being a company based in this part of the world, wanting to serve global markets. At that point in time, there will be a necessity for you to set up your company in other places as well. So that's one thing that has to change, because a lot of geopolitical activities are just ensuring that there are bridges right now between two countries. Like for example, India and US have a bridge on defense and space sector right now. Under that umbrella, we are able to work with US companies and US defense agencies. Similarly, we need such activities with multiple other countries for a deep tech company in this part of the world to globally grow.
Mhm. Yeah, I saw the news about the appointment of a vice president in the US to go after government sales, and that was really interesting to see that you're already reaching out to global customers.
That's also because of the fact that in a sector like defense and space, the sales cycle is pretty long. If you start your sales activity today, probably you'll end up getting a contract 1 year down the lane. So, which means you'll have to keep your product development in mind. At the same time, you'll have to focus on sales now so that 1 year down the lane you can sell these products, because there is a huge time that it takes to convert any of these customers, and it's not as simple and as fast as a commercial entity.
Back in 2020, you had spoken to one of my colleagues, Varsha, and
That
it
was
a
the
very nice
time
interview.
when
and-
we were getting started.
Yeah. And no, I was just recalling from that interview, you had mentioned a partnership with this company called Telespazio.
Yes.
Has that continued?
Yes.
I mean, have they?
So right now, one of our solutions that I just mentioned, Flight Dynamics as a Service, we're working with them on that. So they've been a customer and a partner to us since 2020.
Mhm. Can you explain the business model a little bit more? I've understood it to a certain extent that they'll pay for the insights that you provide them. If you can dive into that a little bit, just walk me through what are the different avenues through which you'll make money.
Okay, sure. So for the defense industry, our business model is very different to a commercial sector. For defense, it's more or less based on the end user requirements. For example, the end user in our case can be an air force of a country or a space force of a country. So they will have certain requirements. We deliver that requirement, be it in terms of hardware or software. So this is more of a lump sum contractual type orders we get, and then we have an annual maintenance for servicing the same user. So that's with the defense markets, be it in India or in the US, it's the same way it works. For commercial markets, we operate exactly like a SaaS company, any other SaaS company. We have a subscription model. Somebody has to, the users have to subscribe on our platform, pay per satellite basis for them to work with our platform or avail our services. And then, like I said, there is one level of basic service that we provide, which is space situational awareness service, where you just understand what's happening around you. Second level of service is where if you want to do a maneuver, if you want to avoid anything like collision, you'll have to plan for that, moving from one point to another. For that particular activity, there is an additional value added fee that they would have to pay, and then they can avail such services. So it's more or less like a software with purchases inside apart from the subscription. So that's how we go about the commercial industry. Typically, the order value in terms of defense and commercial, in terms of defense, it's mostly in the order of $5 to $15 million. For commercial, it can vary from 200 to 2 million. So for commercial, still the ticket sizes are much smaller than the revenue sizes are much smaller than the defense.
And is this $15 to $20 million recurring revenue every year?
So it's more of a recurring revenue.
Wow. Okay. So once you get over the sort of
so
initial
that's
uphill,
correct.
then it's
That's
very high
exactly
margin.
why getting into the system is very important at this point in time. Knowing people, understanding how the government sales cycle work globally
Mm.
is very important to be a successful space company, because One of the things that I often say is SpaceX today is worshipped as one of the best companies in the space industry because of its technologies being futuristic. While that is true, most of their money for their development came from defense, came from, they are the largest defense contractor other than being the space company in the US. So they have made more than $13 billion in revenues just from defense agencies. So we need such anchor customers in any part of the world. For example, if you're an Indian company, for us to be successful in India and become global, it has to be the Indian government which has to anchor and then help us grow, because aerospace and defense is one industry where you need that cyclic capital coming in from the government for capacity development. US focused on capacity development, and that's why they funded a lot of companies like SpaceX, Relativity. They have multiple launch companies today, but they ensure that they give money to almost all of the launch entities because they want all of them to survive. Because it's more of a capacity that they're building for a war kind of a scenario. If there is any, they want emergency capability, they want a reserve capability.
Earlier on, you spoke about sustainable growth in this sector. I didn't fully understand what you meant by that. Can you walk me through what is it that you're referring to when you
Sure.
say sustainable growth?
Yeah. So, like I said, the history, we launched satellites as part of government missions. Initially, Russia and US were at war and they started the space race. They started launching satellites, and later it became more of a civil need where we launched satellites for communication, telemedicine, and a lot of other activities. And right now we're in 2024 speaking about human space flights, launching humans to space, building commercial space stations, wanting to do in orbit servicing, wanting to build an economy for moon, wanting to build an economy in Mars. For all such activities, you will need an infrastructure which is sustainable, which means if you want to travel to space today, is it safe like it is for aviation? No, it is not, because you don't understand the risk today. So until space industry becomes as reliable as aviation, there will be no commercial human space flights like we have at the scale we have for aviation sector. While we have a lot of missions right now where astronauts are being trained and getting launched, so there are a lot of concepts where we want to build uh, commercial space stations, live in orbit, do multiple activities. For any of such activity to happen, there needs a reliable infra. In my definition of infra, what I mean is building that reliableness in terms of how to move from one point to another without any risks or without any dangers. That's absent today. The growth that we're seeing is again 30,000 to 40,000 more satellites in next 5 years. For such a growth, the pace at which we are building capacity to ensure that growth is sustainable. Here, what I mean by sustainable is while you launch all the satellites, it has to be alive. It should not end up in a situation where everything collides and starts to have ripple effects for the industry. So that's what I meant by sustainable.
So, over the next 12 to 18 months, what might be your top priorities?
12 to 18 months top priorities is to launch sensors, get closer to data generation capability, because currently we've spoken about data fusion, processing, software, launching space weather sensors. What we have to do is now get closer to generating our own data with our own sensors, building our own accuracy metrics. So the first priority is to launch sensors. The second priority is to build our own independent library of the data that we collect from our sensors. And the third one is to service this data to government users.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of funding,
Yeah, we're looking
rounds?
at raising another 50 million
50.
very soon. Yeah, 50
Okay.
very soon. This is something that we will do during our closer to the launch or once we do our sensor launch.
Mm-hmm. And what you're hearing, what you're seeing in terms of your investor sentiment, do you think you'll be able to raise $50 million?
Yeah, I think it's again the function of the roadmap that you show to them. It is function of your order book. Like I said, we have taken all the right steps right now by building the government sales team, not just for India but globally. if we are able to show good order value to the prospective investors, I think there are good sentiments to invest in this sector.
What kind of specialists have you had to hire so far, and what kind of specialists will you need in the coming days? Overall team size today?
Overall team size today is around 55 people, um, based in Bangalore, US, and some of them in Ladakh, because we are building the observatory. What we have right now, I mean, the talent pool that we have, most of them are astrodynamics. So they study the behavior of objects in space. They come from either aerospace backgrounds and then masters in orbital mechanics or dynamics. So that's what we have today. Almost 40% to 50% of our tech team is astrodynamics engineers. Apart from that, most of our bandwidth goes into building the hardware, which means we need good optical expertise. So we recently invested in hiring a lot of optical experts who can build sensors in-house. Going forward, we're integrating a laser to it. So we need a lot of embedded engineers, laser engineers to work with our optics team to integrate the optics with laser and then launch. So top priorities right now on the tech side is embedded engineers, electronics, and lasers. So these are certain expertise that we're seeking for. While we've already hired a significant number of people on astrodynamics, that's something that we internally train, because in India you get aerospace engineers and then you'll have to train them for orbital mechanics, because they would have had the basic understanding in their education on orbits. Now they have to learn more beyond that. So that's something that we do internally. On the non-technical side, I think we will expand more into sales, because we feel that we have sufficient products right now that we've internally built, which we want to take out in the market.
So this facility here where we are talking this is where you're assembling
Yes.
most of all your satellites?
So this facility is divided into two quadrants. The other side of our office is where we have satellite operation and command center, that's called a mission control center, where we will be able to control our satellites, where we'll be able to automate and control our observatories that we put in, let's say in Ladakh or any other part of the world. And then we have our assembly line where we assemble the optics or optical payloads into satellites. So we bring in satellites to our facility and then we assemble the payloads here. Then we test it and launch.
So typically, how much time does it take for you to put together one CubeSat?
Right now, we follow an agile mechanism where we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We purchase satellites. I mean, it's now a commodity that you can purchase. So we purchase satellites from Europe, and we work on integrating. Typically, it takes around 6 to 8 months. Right now, going forward, we'll have to increase the pace at which we build this once we have things reliable. Right now, because a lot of our developments involve research and development, it takes good amount of time, be it 8 months to 1 year. For our first satellite, we've already taken 2.5 years just to figure out all the components in the technology development chain, because that is a significant effort, because you're doing it for the first time. Once you have the reliability, you can just replicate it and mass produce.
So when you hit that point where you're sort of steady state mass production, will you be able to bring it down to a matter of weeks, or it will
Yes.
still tame?
We will be able to bring it down to 3 to 4 weeks. Again, here the risk is the supply chain. Currently in the supply chain, we don't have availability for solar cells. So there is a shortage of solar cells right now in the industry. There is a shortage for star sensors, which is a sensor that is used to keep your satellite's attitude intact. There is a shortage for all these. So these supply chain problems may affect certain timelines.
Those are the things that are still missing in the broader deep tech ecosystem in India, right? You don't
Correct.
have
So the
vendors who
problem-
make this locally.
The problem that we're facing right now is, when I said we're bringing our satellites from Europe, it's much cheaper to get it from Europe, because the supply chain is already there. And in India, we're just working on building the supply chain. We're at the initial stages of building that supply chain for all the satellite components. And when you import anything to India, there is a overhead that you have to pay because of taxes, customs, and all of it. So whatever you import, 40% on average you have to pay more on the costs. So that becomes more difficult for us to do everything here in India right now. So we are working towards strengthening the supply chain. Hence, initially we're focusing on building these sensors and then the optics. Going forward, we are seeing how many of the satellite components can be outsourced to Indian vendors and not get it from outside, because again this involves technology transfers, knowledge transfers to the local ecosystem here.
So currently, I would imagine upwards of 80% of your important components you're importing. Fair enough. Um, Very insightful update, Anirudh. Anything that you want to add that I didn't ask you in the context of this small conversation?
No, I think one of the things that I would like to add is about the space industry itself. Being in the space industry, working on something that you launched to orbits that were not accessible before. So space was a luxury before. For somebody to build anything in space, it was very expensive. Unless you're a billionaire, you can't venture into space. But that era has changed right now. So we started as students building space satellites. So we've already seen that access to space has become much simpler, cheaper, and faster. Going forward, I think this industry will see a lot of benefits, and I think space industry will be the largest employers going forward, because directly or indirectly all of us benefit from the space activity, from GPS, emails, stock market operations, every single thing that we do on day-to-day lives. We might not know, but this is a question that everybody asks. If somebody launched Chandrayaan, how does it benefit me, right? So it's more or less that is benefiting for the future of humanity. So something that was invented back in the days, like a microscope, initially by playing around lens, now benefits in the medical research or pharmaceutical research or understanding microorganisms. Similarly, there have been a lot of inventions that was an offshoot of space exploration, which has benefited the mankind. I think investments into this sector has to grow, because this will definitely give yield, and that's why countries like the European Union or the entire ESA is putting in a lot of money towards medicine research through international space stations. There are a lot of activities happening on understanding whether we can live on Moon or maybe on Mars. So a lot of these things will benefit humanity long term.